This is a great question. It speaks to a lot of the experience that I had in, living in Russia, spending time in Ukraine and the South Caucasus. Over a period of years, I regularly visited Ukraine. I was curious about the country. It was relatively close to that region of Russia that I lived in. So while travel was a little bit complicated, interest in Ukraine drew me there. So I've been there many, many times. So in 2009, I began to spend time in a place called the Republic of Abkhazia. Abkhazia is a de facto independent country that separated from Georgia in the early 1990s. There was an ethnic conflict there, and it was sort of murky what Russia or Russians' roles were in Abkhazia at that point in time. But from the early 1990s until about 2008, Abkhazia basically existed in isolation. Nobody recognized it. There was very little commerce going in and out. Eventually, in 2008, Russia recognized Abkhazia. And in 2009, I began to spend quite a bit of time there. And I believe that Abkhazia should develop in the way that maybe Montenegro has. It's a beautiful country. It's on the east side of the Black Sea. Beautiful mountains, beautiful mountain backdrop, warm seas in the summertime, interesting food, nice people. It really should be, it really hasn't had an opportunity to develop in the way that some of the places, as I mentioned, like Montenegro maybe has. So I was spending quite a bit of time in Abkhazia, and my social circle grew quickly. I used some connections, eventually was introduced to both the president and prime minister, got to know them both some. And I was being encouraged by the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It seemed that they were eager for American connections with Abkhazia and for Abkhazia to develop. And that made sense to me. My view at the time about Abkhazia was not terribly nuanced. I thought that Russia's involvement with Abkhazia was benign, that they were trying to help Abkhazia develop. And indeed, in some ways, things looked really good. Abkhazia was having free and fair elections, more so than any of the other nations of the South Caucasus. And I believed with its fantastic tourism potential that Abkhazia really should develop. And again, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was encouraging me. I was going in and out. I was the only American at this time that had active business ties in Abkhazia. I started a business there. I traveled several times to Washington, D.C. to speak at an international forum on their behalf. And it really looked like we were beginning to gain some traction. But the same people that were encouraging me, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the FSB, the security service, I know that they were putting up unseen barriers to me. So what Russia wanted to do was appear to be helping Abkhazia while at the same time hobbling it. And if you look at Russian history, there is a consistency here. So Russia's policy, and I became very disillusioned with it over a period of years, Russia's policy was to divide, corrupt, and control. And that's been a consistent process throughout the post-Soviet period and even before. And I recall that many years ago, when I was very young, I was reading a lot about Russian history and Soviet history, and I was quite interested in reading some Russian literature. And I had a discussion with my father, and this was about the time that the Soviet Union was fighting in Afghanistan. And I had read something about, maybe the Soviets are afraid because they've got so many people around them that they regard as enemies. And I gave my father this argument. He didn't exactly roll his eyes, but as kind as he was, he let me know that he didn't view this as really an accurate viewpoint. And what he explained to me, and history's borne this out, was that the Soviet Union wasn't afraid of their neighbors. They wanted to dominate and control them. What they're afraid of is different views. They're afraid of democracy. They're afraid of losing control. And if you look at, this is a Russian pattern going back to Imperial Russian times and then throughout the Soviet period. And so, I believe my father was right. And if you look at what's happening now in Ukraine, it's the same thing. Those folks that are out there saying that, Russia's afraid of NATO, and Russia's afraid of America, and Russia's afraid of Ukraine. Well, they're afraid of Ukrainian independence. They're afraid of Ukraine rejecting the Russian way of control, domination, and fear. And so Russia views, and I saw this, throughout my time there. Russia views those movements that are democratic as an existential threat to their system. Not NATO, not the United States, not Ukraine, but ideas, freedom, and independence. And those folks that are out there telling you, oh, Russia's afraid of NATO, or Russia's afraid of America interfering, they are either naive and believe Russian propaganda, or they're cynical and they're letting Russia use them as a mouthpiece against Ukraine's independence, against the Ukrainian people's lives.